Hello, everyone. I'm your podcast host, Craig Doremus, and welcome to the Happenings at High Meadows podcast. Today, I'm joined by the Middle Years and Connections Principal, Matt Nuttall. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Matt, if you'll give our viewers just a brief overview of how you learned about High Meadows and what a day-to-day life is like for you as Middle Years and Connections Principal.
Yeah. So I heard about High Meadows pretty randomly. About 6 years ago, I was looking for a leadership role and casting a pretty wide net. And somebody reached out to me and said, you should check out this school. And I was definitely looking for a progressive school. So that had sort of narrowed the search. But geographically, I was pretty open. And so somebody reached out and said, hey, you should find out about this school. And over the course of about 2 weeks, from a phone call from here at High Meadows to coming to visit and getting the position, I took the role here as middle school principal. And then COVID hit and the world closed, and we came anyway. So I didn't actually know anything about High Meadows or Roswell initially, but was drawn to the type of school. It was definitely the kind of place I was trying to be. So that's how I ended up here, and I'm now in my sixth year here at High Meadows. As far as a typical, I think the most important thing to know is there is no typical day. There isn't anything that follows day to day, right? So some days consist of a whole lot of time in classrooms, and some days less. Some days I get to teach. Some days I'm in meetings with leadership. Some days we're sort of metaphorically putting out fires. Sometimes I'm popping over to pre-K randomly just to see what's going on. So my work in this role is about supporting kids, obviously, but also faculty, staff, and parents and families, right? So that's probably each of my days has some combination of time with each of those groups of folks.
You have a unique role from a principal perspective in the fact that as Connections Principal, you see the pre-K through 5th grade students and have relationship with them, not only these 6th through 8th grade students that are in middle years, but talking about middle years, what are the core classes for middle years as far as academics go?
Yeah. So all of our kids take 5 core classes in middle years. So English, math, Spanish, science, and social studies. Those are their daily courses, and middle years is the first time where that structure exists. Right, so it sort of mirrors what a lot of us likely experienced as we were in middle school and high school. So those are the classes, and we are 6-7 multi-age. So it's a 2-year loop in 6 and 7, and 8th grade is standalone. So that's sort of the big chunk of their day. The other piece of the day, of course, is their mini courses, which is where our connections in middle years world tends to overlap.
Mini courses is a unique term, and I think when a lot of viewers and listeners are consuming this podcast, they think of electives, your typical art that you're in for a semester, but our quote-unquote electives, mini courses, are so different than any other school. What is a mini course, and how does it allow our students to have an active voice and choice in their education?
Yeah, it's definitely unique. It's I've been in a handful of schools as a teacher and an administrator, and this is the most unique approach. Living it now, it's hard for me to actually imagine it not being part of the experience of a middle school now that I see the value. So the biggest difference is that they're called mini courses because they're sort of like a January term approach. So they're 6 weeks long, right? So every 6 weeks, students take 2 classes at a time. And some of those classes are long-term, right? So if a student really wants to invest in the band, right, the band or the debate team, right? Those are things that they can commit to long-term and they can do for most or all of the year. Aside from that, though, every 6 weeks they're making different choices. And living in those mini courses, right, these 6-week classes, exists all of our connections programs, right? So theater and the visual arts and performing arts and barnyard, PE, all of those courses that our pre-K to 5 students have still live as options in many courses for middle year students. They get much more specific, right? So a barnyard class might be embryology for 6 weeks, right? Hatching of chickens, as opposed to a more broad experience for a 3rd or 4th or 5th grader here. Aside from that, though, I think what really adds to the robustness of the mini course program is that all of our teachers offer courses, and those courses are constantly changing. So a teacher will have an idea, or a student will have an idea for a new class, right? A couple years ago, a student came and said, I'd really like to paint a mural, right? And we said, okay, well, do you know how to do that? Do you have any experience? A little bit. Is there a grown-up here who has that experience? And they went and they found a grown-up, one of our teachers, who happens to have some painting and mural background. And so that class came from an idea from a student. And because of the nature of our program, where the options change every 6 weeks, we have the flexibility to make it dynamic. We have the flexibility to decide today to offer a class in March that we've never offered before, right? And so the ability to do that flexibility and creative space is where both of our teachers and our students can say, hey, I have this skill or this curiosity or this interest, and let's pursue it. The other part of that with the choice is the students get a menu, right? So again, and that menu changes every 6-week session since I've been here has been different. There is no repetition. So the options, they're provided to the students. They rank those choices, and then we're able to take into account their thinking and their desire as we give them an experience over the course of their time. And that part's not necessarily unusual, right? Lots of middle schools, you can say, I want to be in chorus, right? Or I want to be in band, right? And that's true. But the idea that our kids can make that choice 4 or 5 times a year and make different choices year on and year out is really part of what makes it so exciting.
I love that you and your middle years team are not just sticking kids in a class, that you're giving them that ability to choose, to say, hey, I want to be in embryology, or advocating and say, hey, I want to be in flag football for this 6 weeks, or I want to make a full year commitment to our state championship debate winning program with Coach Wolf.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing. We talk about this a lot. There is everything I think in middle years is a balance. I think that's the nature of adolescence, right? So we want to both recognize kids' passions and interests. We love the investment you get. You can imagine as a teacher what it's like to get a group of students who said, I want to be in this class, right? And what you're able to do in that space with kids who said, I'm into the band, I'm committed, or I'm going to compete in debate, right? So I think that's a part of it. We also still want to be making sure that over the course of their time, we are pushing them into things that they might not necessarily choose, right? So that's one of the reasons students don't always get their first choice, right? Because part of our role as educators is also to say, for example, especially to a 6th grader who's new to middle years, you should try this. I think you'd really thrive here or find this interesting. And if you don't, 6 weeks will be over and you can try something else, right? And so we are constantly trying to do both things, which is honor their passions. And for example, students who really want to commit to theater, right? They want to do an improv class. They want to do the spring show. They want to do the musical. We want to give them that space, which is really totally age appropriate, and keep challenging them to step into spaces that are new and maybe a little uncomfortable and are less familiar, to see what they can learn in those spaces.
Tremendous. That's just a tremendous model for electives, for many courses. The way we do it here, and I am biased, is amazing. And I wish I had that opportunity as a child for sure. Yeah. One of the great things that our 8th graders get to do is the capstone project. And our middle years program is academically rigorous. Our students are prepared for high school and beyond. Some of them have said that, they go to a prestigious high school and it's like they've already done the first 2 years of high school because of what they've learned at High Meadows. It's not that we're over-preparing them, but we're giving them the tools they need to succeed, allowing them to ask questions. Then they go into high school and expand. What is the capstone project, and how does research and presentation and preparation play into that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually think to understand, I think the power of capstone, we have to go back a little bit. So the idea, capstone is the end, the culmination, for example, of this notion of encouraging our students to research and investigate things that are of interest to them, connect to experts in the field, right? Really find people who know that or are doing that kind of work, and dive really deeply. And in fact, that concept really starts in 4 or 5 with exhibition, right? Which is this idea of we're going to do this thing for long term. What we are then able to do is build those research skills over time. So in 6th and 7th grade, they might do living museum, right? Where they're researching a historical figure in the civil rights movement and learning enough about them to be them, and perform like them. So then when they get to 8th grade, what Capstone allows them to do is, one, really fine-tune those research skills, right? So really get into, like, how do I find a reliable source, right? How do I bring skepticism into this, right? How do I find opposing viewpoints of something that I'm trying to do? But also, how do I formulate a question that is researchable, right? I think one of the hardest things that kids have to learn and students have to learn is, I have this thing I'm curious about, but how do I ask the right question in order to find the kind of information I'm looking for? And I think what makes Capstone unique is that early in the year, we introduced this idea that they're going to get to research a topic of their own choosing. And the choices are pretty much endless, right? I mean, we're pretty broad early on in terms of saying, follow something you're really curious about, right? And then they spend the first semester really dabbling in it, just asking questions, doing a little research, often throwing away ideas that just don't feel like they're going to work. And then as they get into the spring, there's a real focus on connecting with experts and the world outside of High Meadows, putting together a formal research paper, and it culminates in the symposium. And so we spend a day in late April, and each 8th grade student presents to peers, 6th and 7th grade students, faculty, parents, other kids' parents, any guests, and they present their findings, right? What did they want to learn about? Why did they want to learn about it? And what did they learn? Right? And the topics really are incredibly broad, right? I've mentored students who spent a whole semester studying NASCAR and the design of those cars, like why it is they build that way, right? We've had students investigate historical time periods. We've had students investigate 3D printing, sort of what are its possibilities, what are its pitfalls, right? And so the topics are incredibly broad, and generally the most successful ones involve some connection to the world outside High Meadows. So somebody doing that kind of work where they can really learn what it looks like, and a passion that they have, right? Be it science or music or math or engineering or something like that.
Co-founder Jody Holden said that we wanted our students from the start to love learning. And you mentioned that the topics are broad. And by the way, whoever studied NASCAR, I think there should be a study of that with every single capstone each year. How, by allowing them to choose their topics and really study whatever they want, are you encouraging them to love learning rather than confining them to 3 or 4 decisions that may not be something they're interested in?
Yeah, I think it's like I talk a lot about balance when it comes to adolescence, right? So they get a lot of content experience from their teachers, right? So the books that we're reading and the math that they're studying. So there's a lot of opportunity for content to be shared with them and built collaboratively. What Capstone allows them to do is sort of take all the experience they've had as a student, some of whom have been here just a couple years and some of whom have been here since they were 3 years old, and think about things that they find personally interesting and commit time to it. And then we give them class time to commit to it, right? So it's similar in some ways to the mini course concept, which is, we know that great learning happens when it is connected to a kid's desire to know and understand something.
Absolutely.
Right? And right, when we connect to those passions. And in truth, we can't always do that, right? We can't have a student say, I'm really not a fan of math, and therefore not do any math, right? We don't have that. But what we create here, and I think we create it here more than many places, is we find spaces where their passion gets to live. And Capstone is a really great example. Right, and we really try, and I think we're pretty good at it, not to overly restrict what they want to pursue. What we're also often helping them do as mentors is narrow, right? So a student who says, I really want to learn about 3D printing, that's an incredibly broad topic. And so part of their learning with us and their work and the role of the adults is, how do I narrow that to something that's manageable? Right, because our kids are very mature and they are only 14, right? And so they are still new to this. And so I think really we want to be able to get them to stand up at the end and say, this is something I'm really passionate about, and my school let me have the time set aside to learn this thing that really interests me. And I think that fosters this idea of, like, I can learn for its own sake.
Right. And that's what you want, is to develop students who are learning continually, 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the road.
Yeah.
One thing that we do here is an off-campus trip, 1 week long, 10 days for 8th grade for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Jekyll Island, Williamsburg, and Colorado, the culminating trip for our 8th graders. What goes into each of those trips, and how does it complement learning in the classroom and across our beautiful 42-acre campus?
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I think it's one of those things that's pretty unique. I know lots of schools that travel. I've come from schools that travel with middle school students. It's pretty unusual to travel the extent that we do. So a week-long trip with 6th graders is generally the exception, especially when you require all students to do it, right? So a lot of schools will do a spring break trip and you can opt in and go to Costa Rica or something like that. But we call it travel school, right? And so, the week in Jekyll, which we're going to be there in just a few weeks from now with our 6th graders, it's school the whole time, right? So it's a lot of what is High Meadows. So we're still talking about science and social studies, and we're still doing some writing, but we're doing all of that in the context of traveling, right? And so what we're doing on that trip is making a budget. We are learning what is good to eat when I'm on the road. We're learning to share spaces with classmates, right? We're learning about how to handle ourselves in a restaurant or when we're in public or at a museum, right? So all these skills that we know as adults are crucial to functioning in the world, we're deliberately teaching them, right, to our students. And so, of course, the experience of learning the science or the history of a place, right? So the American history-rich experience in Williamsburg and the experience of the tides on Jekyll Island and hiking the Rocky Mountains in Colorado are all experiences in and of themselves, but they're also connected to the curriculum, right? So it's not a trip away. Right, it's school that we happen to be doing in some other location. And I think part of what makes them so successful is that we're all together, right? So it's a team of teachers, it's all the students, and we're together 24/7 for that time that we're gone. And so what we're able to learn and do with them as growing humans is pretty remarkable because of the time that we have together, right? And that we're doing everything, breakfast and lunch, and making sure that it's time for brushing your teeth, and all of those things that go into just the regular life of an adolescent, we're doing together as a community as we're traveling.
One non-academic thing I want to talk about is something called Meadow Time. And for those unfamiliar with High Meadows School, you might be thinking, what is Meadow Time? Is it a daily gathering, a ritual? But it's what many schools would call recess. And in an age where middle schoolers may have 2 or 3 minutes of recess or a 7 or 8 minute time to be just outside after lunch break with no real play, we've actually added time to our Meadow Time. What do these kids get to do at Meadow Time, and how does it benefit their learning that free, unstructured play?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned it. We currently, I think I say often that we say what's important to us by the time we give it, and that's never as true as it is when you're building a school schedule. Anyone who's ever built a school schedule knows how complicated it is and what a puzzle it is. So when we sit down and make a schedule and say our kids all the way to age 14 in 8th grade need 45 minutes outside to play, that is a statement, right? So the time we give it is a statement, and I consider the time almost sacred. And they are actually playing, right? So it is not unusual to go out at Meadow Time and see a 7th grader on a tire swing. They're playing football. They're playing basketball. They're also, and this is what makes it start to look a little different, they're also meeting with a teacher, right? They also might opt into reviewing their math homework, right? So part of that choice that we think is so important for adolescents still exists at Meadow Time, right? So we really think it's important that they get the play and be outside, which we know are crucial to their health and well-being. We also know it's the only way we can continue to do really intense, complicated learning, right? So if I think there's a misunderstanding that you get more learning by having more class time. Obviously, if we have 45 minutes of Meadow, we have 45 minutes we've taken from something, right? That time could have been in math, it could have been in reading, it could have been in science, right? So we've made a choice with our time, and we believe that choice actually enhances what we were doing during class time, because we know how important that is to their ability to continue to successfully learn.
There are certain studies out there that show the benefits of play and the benefits on cognitive development, social development, emotional development, et cetera. And I think it's a wonderful thing about High Meadows. Yep. Before we talk about our graduates and the wonderful 8th graders who have left this place and gone on to do amazing things, I want to take viewers through the pre-K through 5th grade Connections program. Yep. And the different offerings that are available to those learners.
Yeah. So I was just saying this a few minutes ago. We're really lucky, and I think about this. I am a parent here as well. So when I first came to High Meadows, I think about it through both lenses. I always do, and I often tell people how incredibly lucky we are that I tell my team this when I meet with the Connections team, that our kids are learning from experts in their field all day. And so when they're going to theater class, even as a 3-year-old, their theater teacher has studied theater and performs theater, right, and loves theater and is continuing and is introducing ideas around theater and the theater arts as young as 3 and 4, all the way up to 8th grade, right? And so the program is incredible in its diversity, right? So the barnyard and Spanish and the visual and performing arts and music, PE and nature and environmental sustainability. We have all these options available to us, library and technology lab. This is all part of this overarching experience that says we want kids to be exposed to all these different content areas. Not every age has all of them. As you might imagine, our pre-K, our newest students, don't have all of those Connections classes. It would be incredibly overwhelming. So there's a natural scaffolding up, right, of those course options. But by the time a student hits kindergarten through 5th grade, every week they're having all of those Connections classes. And so their week and their day is full of these experiences of stepping into the art room, right, and then stepping out onto the soccer field for PE, and then stepping into the barnyard all throughout the week. And one of the things that's great is that team of teachers also gets to know those kids all the way through. Right. And so, to have the expertise we have in content is amazing. Right. So in terms of our music teacher still performs musically, our art teacher still creates art. So they're still doing that work and they're experts, and they know the kids from when they were 4 and 6 and 9. Right. So they also bring a perspective that's so valuable because they've seen the students grow over time. Right. And again, it's an embarrassment of riches. I would say one of the challenges we face is that we can't find enough time for our kids to have enough more of the, we want every teacher in the Connections team is asking for more class time, right? I need more time with these kids to do what I want to do. And it's a wonderful problem to have, right? When your team is saying, can I have them more? I have so much more to do. Right. And we're saying, well, what we see is this well-rounded experience. And all of that does culminate as they get to middle years, where now they get to say, I've had this, if they've been here, I've had this experience of a sort of a survey course of Connections. And now I get to say, music is my thing, right? Art is my thing. And that's really what I want to spend more time on.
Put yourself in the shoes of a pre-K through 5th grader at High Meadows. If you were here for the first time, what Connections class would you be most excited about, and why? It's
a good question. God, I'm going to get in trouble with my team. I think probably, I always loved PE. I've been a sports guy my whole life. But music is my other great love. And I don't remember having a lot of music experience as a student. So we had chorus, but very little instrumental experiences. So for me, I look at our students where they get to start kind of experimenting with instruments in middle of elementary, and then the recorder, of course, and then the fact that every 5th grader learns an instrument in the band. And for some of them, that will be the only time in their life they will ever play the saxophone, but they get a whole year to do it, right? I think that for me would have been, and maybe that's thinking about me now as opposed to thinking about when I was younger, but the opportunity to get to really dive into music that deeply is something that I don't think, a lot of schools have.
Right. As we wrap up here, I want to talk about our alumni. I've been very fortunate to see several graduating classes and speak to plenty of alumni who love High Meadows, who cherish it, who come back and support it. And they all say that, A, they have fond memories, They were not afraid to raise their hand, to advocate for themselves. They had confidence. They were academically prepared. And that if you send your child to High Meadows, you will have a special human living in their house.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, as you might imagine, when I first got here, not knowing the school well, the alumni were one of the best resources to have a sense of this place, because it's hard to know, right? We're a pretty small school. We're pretty unique. And I think what's interesting about High Meadows is that the students go to such a wide range of schools when they leave, right? It's in my experience, students often who go to independent schools stay in independent school, and here we have really mostly the opposite. So they're coming from here and going to very different communities and schools. And so the first couple of years, really, I spent a lot of time just listening to alums telling me what it is that they brought from this place. And the themes that pop up every year at Evening with Alumni, which is something anyone who's connected to High Meadows in any way should attend every year, the themes are always the same, right? This idea of, I learned a lot, right? I learned a lot of math. I learned a lot of science. I feel really prepared, right? The sort of the ways we expect, right? So I got to Spanish class and I felt like I was a year ahead, right? That kind of thing. But I think that's true. I think more than that, the themes that strike me are the kids who say, I was so comfortable speaking up in class. I went to my teacher and said, I need extra help. When can you help me? Right? A self-assuredness, but also a self-awareness that comes only from when you give kids the time and the space to know and learn about themselves in a safe environment, right? And so I think our kids feel like they can make mistakes here and ask questions and figure out who they are as a kid, as a human, as a learner. And then they bring that with them. And often I think when they come back to visit, which they often do, what they share is a little bit of the juxtaposition about their experience as a student relative to their new classmates, right? Which is like, they notice then what was the norm here, right? This idea that I work hard, and all my friends do their work, and I try my best, and I ask questions when I need help. And I speak up in class, and I contribute to discussion because that's just what was expected of me. And I think those are the skills that really pay off. Those are the less obvious or maybe less tangible skills that pay off as they grow, right? So when our alums become college students, when they become adults, and they come back and they say, this is how I function in the world, these are the skills I brought with me, that's the thing I think is really, really valuable, right? Which is, I know that you're going to be great in ninth grade. I'm much more curious about how you feel when you're 20 and where you see it still living on in your life at that point.
That is incredible. And High Meadows is just a tremendous place preparing students to have a global impact and to succeed academically in high school, college, and in the workforce. Matt, thank you for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm Craig Doremus, the host of the Happenings at High Meadows podcast. If you'd like to learn more, visit www.highmeadows.org/visit and schedule a time to see our 42-acre campus today. We can't wait to meet you.